Pleased to be sharing with you tonight a topic that I've been exploring. One of the lesser known of the Buddha's many lists, the five spiritual faculties, which are faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And you'll note it begins with the important concept of faith in Buddhism. Which probably appealed to me because this is my first Dharma talk and it's a leap of faith. And so I kept exploring it. So tonight I'm going to describe the five faculties, but then we'll be focusing quite a bit on faith and how it develops. And I'll share my personal reflections, and I'll ask you to reflect as well on how we arrived on this path. So the five spiritual faculties are a way of understanding the unfolding of mindfulness practice, or the path of awakening. They can help us take a step back from our regular daily practice of sitting, walking, compassion practice, to consider why we're doing it and what it is that energizes our practice. What does it take to move toward liberation? Perhaps we're just here to learn how to meditate, to be more mindful and peaceful. And for others, this is more of a spiritual practice, and it's helpful to consider how our practice supports our own unique spiritual journey. So however we define it, to grow in practice, we need a certain amount of interest, effort, awareness, perseverance, and insight. And like most growth, it's not linear. This is a spiral of unfolding, and we'll visit and revisit these faculties as we need them again and again. So let's talk first about each of these faculties in turn. The first is faith, or saddha in Pali. It literally means to put your heart into something. Saddha also translates as devotion and confidence. Because in our Western tradition, faith is often associated with specific religions, I'd like to ask us to think more broadly about faith in the context of tonight's talk. For example, Joseph Goldstein describes faith as that feeling that opens the mind and heart to what is beyond our usual ego concerns and desires. It opens us to what is greater than ourselves, to the possibility of freedom. And then Sharon Salzberg says that from her perspective, faith does not require a belief system. And it's not necessarily connected to a deity or a God, though it doesn't deny one. This faith is not a commodity we either have or don't have. It's an inner quality that unfolds as we learn to trust our own deepest experience. So we'll come back to faith later. But the second faculty is energy, and despite our good intentions, without putting effort into our practice, we won't create the energy we need to investigate our experience. Energy gives us the perseverance to continue in practice even when it's hard. The third faculty, mindfulness, is the heart of Buddhist meditation, the way we pay attention to our moment-to-moment experience and see clearly. And the fourth faculty, concentration, focuses on single-pointed attention to still our mind and still distractions, and it steadies our attention. And wisdom is the fifth faculty. Now, part of wisdom is learning skillful means for growing in our practice, and which approaches are wholesome and beneficial to us at any given time. We may study with different teachers or practices or meditation techniques. But then wisdom also flowers as we see into the nature of existence through our own experience. We gain some understanding of samsara, or the unsatisfactoriness of life, impermanence, selflessness. Or in the words of Ruth King, life's not perfect, it's not permanent, and it's not personal. So how do all these faculties work together to keep us on track in practice? Well, mindfulness is the center, balancing all of the faculties, and the other faculties balance one another in pairs. The five faculties have been described as, think of the image of a horse drawing a cart. The horse is mindfulness, giving us the horsepower for our practice. And then the other faculties must stay in balance in order to support the four wheels of the cart. So the sets of wheels represent faith, balanced by wisdom and discernment, and energy, balanced by concentration. So too much faith can be blind faith, and too much focus on wisdom can be dry and cerebral. Just think of the bedside table Buddhist learning mindfulness from a book rather than through embodied practice or personal experience. Too much energy without concentration to still our attention can lead to agitation and the lack of steadiness. Too much concentration to still us without enough energy can lead to sloth and torpor. But a balance of energy and concentration provides the perseverance to steady the practice. So it starts with faith. Faith is an important faculty in our journey on the path. And this poem by Julie Cadwallader Staub is a great starting point. It's called Longing. She says, consider the black pole warbler. She tips the scales at 1 ounce before she migrates, taking off from the seacoast to our east, flying higher and higher, ascending 2 or 3 miles during her 80 hours of flight, until she lands in Tobago, north of Venezuela, 3 days older and weighing half as much. She flies over open ocean almost the whole way. Oh, she's not so different from us. The arc of our lives is a mystery too. We do not understand. We cannot see what guides us on our way. That longing that pulls us toward light. Not knowing, we fly onward, hearing the dull roar of the waves below. You might ask, what kind of faith does it take to take off and fly 2 or 3 miles into the air, go for 80 hours and arrive at half your weight? What allows that leap of faith? Or what gives us the courage to jump off the high diving board? Or to move to a new city? Or to fall in love? Faith is a choice. It's that moment when we choose to believe that there is something bigger than ourselves to believe in. And some people have painful associations with faith. It can be a charged word in our culture, where we often focus on differences among faith traditions. And perhaps our childhood faith tradition didn't support us or allow us to ask questions. But others may have a very strong commitment to a faith tradition that they practice in parallel with their mindfulness practice. We all have our own journey. For me, I lost my faith in religion at a young age. The doctrine that was handed down to me didn't ring true. And the hierarchy and treatment of women left me feeling that I didn't trust this institution with my spiritual development. It didn't feel authentic to me. So doubt and a need for trust were critical for me. So I laugh when I think of my early discernment process to determine whether Buddhism was for me. It was a combination of desperation, research, and intuition. The desperation was the suffering. I knew that I needed something to help me find more peace. And at a particularly tough time in my life, following the loss of loved ones and family members struggling with addictions and trauma, I found a little meditation class at the Community Recreation Center. And I thought, this might be what I'm looking for. Meditation and Buddhism appealed to me. They seemed to offer the peace that I sought without requiring adherence to a doctrine or a worship of a human or a god. So I did some research in an authoritative source. I went to the library and I got out Buddhism for Dummies. And there I found reassurance on two key points that raised doubts for me. Buddhism was described as more of a belief system rather than a religion. And it didn't require worship of a deity. I thought, I can do this. So I began my studies and sought out wonderful teachers at Insight Meditation Community of Washington. And reading about the Dharma, it was the Buddha's assurance that we should try it on for ourselves and take the practices that work for us that made me say, this I can trust. The Buddha insisted, don't believe anything just because I have said it. Don't believe anything just because an elder or someone you respect has said it. Put it into practice. See for yourself if it is true. So this belief system doesn't ask me to have blind faith. Buddhism believes that I have discernment and can find some answers within. My intuition told me that these practices were useful to me. They could be trusted. So whether inspired by tragedy and a need for solace, or just the sense that there's a power greater than myself to which I aspire, perhaps you can remember that moment when you felt that glimmer of possibility, that spark of faith that gives us the feeling that these practices are what I need. And you said, I'm going for it. I'm going for it. I want us to just pause at this point and reflect on that. And I'll ask you a couple of questions, but I am going to ask for those who are willing, if for about 5 minutes, if we can break into a small group and share your reflections. Do you recall a moment when you found meditation practice or Buddhism? Was there a catalyst to your stepping on the path? Perhaps you recall doubts that made this choice difficult. And perhaps you're still considering your level of commitment to these practices. Well, I'll just say I know that we shared everybody's story of their faith development was unique. And I imagine that might be the case for many of us. For me, although Buddhism flirted with me in and out throughout my life for many, many years, there was a point at which I feel as though I chose the path, and that was my leap of faith. Like many people, what led me to meditation practice was suffering. Thomas Merton says, prayer and love are learned in the hour when prayer becomes impossible and the heart has turned to stone. So when it gets tough, we turn. And in Buddhism, suffering is considered the proximate cause of faith, the nearest or most likely reason. I was so relieved when I found that in this tradition, suffering was acknowledged, understood, not shied away from. My suffering didn't make me alone or different or less than. Here I was told that suffering was part of human nature. And whether that suffering was from the loss of a loved one, material resources, our innocence, our sense of safety, or suffering from the state of the world, we all suffer and we can all be happy. We all experience in our lives 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows. We suffer and we have a wondrous Buddha nature. It all belongs. I love the story of Kisagatami's mustard seed. You may have heard it. Kisagatami came from a poor family. She fell in love and married a wealthy man whose family didn't accept her. But when she gave birth to a son, They finally respected her. But when the child was still a toddler, he died, and Kisagatami was wild with grief. She wouldn't accept his death and carried her dead child from house to house asking for medicine. A wise man sent her to the Buddha, who told her, "I'll give you medicine to revive your child if you bring me a mustard seed from a house where no one has died." So Kisagatami went from house to house, but at every house she learned that someone had died. So she returned to the Buddha, who asked her whether she brought a mustard seed, and she responded that at every house someone had died. Kisagatami understood that death and sorrow happen to everyone. She buried her son and became ordained as a nun. Now, Buddhism tells us that not only is suffering a universal truth, but we can know the causes of suffering, and there's an end to suffering, and there's a way to get there. We attend to suffering not because we're masochistic, but because these practices can bring an end to suffering. But we may come up against doubt repeatedly. But in Buddhism, our faith grows as we question the teachings, as we try them on, as we see how they make a difference in our lives. We talk about 3 stages of faith: bright faith, verified faith, and abiding faith. So we begin in bright faith, where we delight in the possibility and the promise of a transformative faith that'll change our lives. And bright faith can inspire practice, but it's not sufficient to sustain it. Bright faith can become blind faith when we believe everything without question. But faith can be strengthened by doubting, questioning, and putting into practice. And that leads to verified faith. So our Buddhist tradition encourages us to try different techniques and to choose those that work for us. And how do we know what practices are right for us? The faculties can be helpful in considering how balanced our practice is and whether, for instance, we need more energy or more concentration at a given time. Joseph Goldstein suggests that Western Buddhism challenges us to ask very simple questions about our practice. What works? What works to free the mind from suffering? What works to engender a heart of compassion? What works to awaken? We get the opportunity to verify faith through our own experience, and in so doing, we integrate it. We own it. We develop faith in ourselves, in our own inner knowledge. So as we deepen in faith, guided by teachings and wise teachers, we develop abiding faith, our own capacity to trust ourselves and to practice in ways that are supportive and to discern the truth. In Buddhism, abiding faith generally entails taking refuge in the 3 gems: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So our faith in the Dharma, built upon the teachings from generations of Asian spiritual leaders, lays out clear practices in the path toward liberation. And we absorb these teachings as we're ready. And faith in the Dharma calls for a certain surrender, an abiding faith and continuing practice when the going gets tough. Mindfulness allows us to see the wisdom of the essential truths, that change is constant, that life is not perfect, and that things won't always go our way. And eventually, our faith lies in the wisdom that's revealed to us. And then there's faith in the Buddha. The Dalai Lama says that at the heart of Buddha's teachings lies the idea that the potential for awakening and perfection is present in every human being, and that it's a matter of personal effort to realize that potential. So abiding faith leads us to have faith in our own Buddha nature, or Christ consciousness, or whatever we call that sacred spark in each of us. And because Buddhist teachings arise out of the experience of a human being rather than being conferred by a deity, great emphasis is placed on abiding faith in oneself. It's about building trust and overcoming doubt, not just in the teachings, but in our own true capacities. So, can I have faith in my own experience as the source of awakening? Can I stay with my moment to moment experience and allow truth to emerge? So, faith in the Buddha inspires us to have faith in ourselves. Like the Buddha reaching down to touch the earth while sitting under the Bodhi tree, unwavering faith knows to call upon the trustworthy earth of our own nature. And then finally, faith in the Sangha. Now, most of us need a spiritual community to support us in our journey. I think of the important role of my Sanghas in opening my heart and thawing my frozen emotions. Spiritual friends were critical to hold the space for me while my faith germinated, grew, flourished. The Buddha told this story about faith. I love this one. A herd of cows arrives at the bank of a wide stream. The mature cows see the stream and wade across it. The Buddha likened them to the enlightened beings who have crossed the stream of ignorance and suffering and know the way. The younger, less mature cows stumble apprehensively at the shore, but eventually go ahead and cross the stream. Then come the calves. They are trembling with fear, some just barely walking, but these young, vulnerable calves also get to the other side. They cross the stream just by following the voices of their mothers lowing. The calves trust their mothers and want to reunite with them on the other side, so they follow their voices and cross the stream. That, the Buddha said, is the power of faith to call us forward. So this story makes me think of the teachers and Sangha members and mentors who have called to me to cross the river when I needed encouragement. My earliest teachers and spiritual friends groups in DC, here at IMCC, Heather Karp encouraging me when I teach at Fluvanna Prison, you can do this, you have a voice. Or IMCC members welcoming me to this community. And the teachers and mentors like Jean Van Gemert and Teresa Miller, who helped me to see the light in myself. So a deep bow to all of you women. You really keep me believing. And I just wonder if you can reflect, is there someone who's helped you to cross the stream in your journey? Someone who you think back on and think, boy, I'm just really grateful for them. They got me here. Thich Nhat Hanh says, if we're a drop of water and we try to get to the ocean as only an individual drop, we'll surely evaporate along the way. To arrive at the ocean, you must go as a river, and the Sangha is your river. So faith in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is the core of abiding faith. And now these days, our faith can be challenged. We could ask, what place does faith have in a world where a pandemic, racism, and inequality seem endless? You could say that this is why we practice. With abiding faith in our own Buddha nature and our practices, even in the darkest days, we can see more clearly the values that guide us. I think of Susan Kaufman and Sharon Beckman Brindley when they spoke to the Clergy Collective video on the 3rd anniversary of the white supremacist march on Charlottesville. And they said, faith and Buddhist principles reminds us in these times that hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. That our tradition calls for us to remain aware, not to turn away from suffering, and to respond with compassion and action. To have faith that speaking up can lead to the removal of racist symbols in our public spaces. We've seen this in activist movements throughout our country's history. Faith and action has motivated some of the most significant progress in the civil rights and peace movements. As the late Congressman John Lewis said, the civil rights movement was based on faith. Many of us who were participants in the movement saw our involvement as an extension of our faith. We saw ourselves doing the work of the Almighty. Segregation and racial discrimination were not in keeping with our faith, so we had to do something. So I'm wrapping up. Faith and all of the five spiritual faculties support mindfulness and balance one another to steady our progress on the path. So it can be helpful from time to time to check in on the quality of the balance of our spiritual faculties. With faith, we can check in on our intention for practice. How strong is our commitment? Our doubts? With energy, are we committing a level of energy and concentration that helps our practice thrive? Mindfulness, how consistent is our mindfulness practice, whether it's formal or informal? And wisdom, is my practice focused? Does it allow me to see glimpses of insights from my personal experience of the teachings? You know, much as my striving mind wants an actual 8-step path to liberation with directions and checkpoints and tests along the way, I imagine the path as a set of stepping stones. And I can see the first and second and maybe a little bit of the third, but the rest are floating ahead in a cloud, still unclear to me. So alighting on this path requires courage and trust and faith. And then what does this faith give me? What's the point of this practice anyway? Well, some say it's courage. That with faith in our practice, we have the courage to know that no matter what happens, we can be with it. Bhikkhu Bodhi says, liberation is the inevitable fruit of the path and is bound to blossom forth when there's steady and persistent practice. The only requirements for reaching the final goal are two: to start and to continue. If these two requirements are met, there's no doubt the goal will be attained. This is the Dhamma, the undeviating law. So the invitation is to put it into practice and see for yourself if it is true. So thank you for joining me in this exploration of faith tonight.